So in talking about stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination, it can be really helpful to go back to the ABCs of social psychology that we covered in the very beginning of this course. So affect, behavior, and cognition, right? Affect are your emotions, they're your feelings about something. Behavior, the actual observable actions you take. And then cognitions, or the ideas, the content, the thoughts that you have. And these three aspects map onto that system. So prejudice is part of the affect. It refers to the emotional reactions and feelings toward a particular group. It informs the attitudinal basis that might lead to discrimination, but doesn't always translate directly into observable actions. So people can have biased feelings towards a group of people without necessarily acting on them, in which case they may be prejudiced, but not actively engaging in discrimination of some kind. Now, discrimination is a behavior, right? So it focuses on the actual behaviors and actions that differentiate between individuals based on their group membership. Discrimination is the tangible manifestation of prejudiced feelings or stereotyped beliefs. And then, of course, that leads us to the third one, stereotypes, which are cognitions, ideas that we have about groups of people. Stereotypes concern the cognitive aspect of understanding others through generalized thoughts and beliefs about a group's characteristics. These cognitive shortcuts can influence both emotions, prejudice, and behaviors, discrimination. So it's important to tease these out and recognize that somebody can have all three of them overlapping, or two of them, or just one of them. I mean, somebody can participate in discriminatory behavior and not actually have stereotypes or prejudice. Right? Think about how redlining, for example, was so economically negatively influential for the Black community, where neighborhoods of Black folks could not get home loans. And so to this day, it's a huge contributor to the racial wealth gap, because many Black families rented because they were not able to get loans to purchase a home. Now, you can imagine a real estate agent, certainly you could imagine one that was prejudiced and helped reinforce this. But you could also imagine, one who is not prejudiced or did not feel any, negative emotions towards the Black community, but because those policies were in place, avoided showing Black families homes in neighborhoods where they didn't think that they would be able to get, the kind of funding for the house they needed or a loan, right? And so people can have a kind of benevolent participation in discrimination if they're not careful. That's why understanding the systemic issues is so important, because oftentimes people think, if somebody says, oh, you're racist or you're sexist or you're ableist or whatever, category we're talking about, that is always implying these really negative feelings towards someone. But it's possible that even in the absence of very negative feelings, that you can still be a part of unfair systems and structures in a society that disadvantage certain groups of people. So teasing these out is helpful. Do you have accurate information about a group of people? Or are your stereotypes flawed, right? So we always categorize groups of people. We have to survive, right? If every single human you interacted with on the street, you had no preconceived notions of what they might be like, that would be highly chaotic and you wouldn't really know how to get through your day, right? But if you're walking across campus and you recognize a student or somebody that you think is a faculty member or somebody that you think is homeless or somebody that, in your mind looks shady or aggressive or somebody who looks kind or pleasant, that helps shape who you will talk to, who you'll ask, questions to. If they approach you, whether you'll try to be avoidant or helpful. And often those categorizations can be helpful for day-to-day interaction, survival, and so forth. Now they can become overblown, right? Especially if you have fictitious information in your mind about a racial category or what men or women are really like, or something like that. But understanding that there is this distinction between affect, behavior, and cognition when we're talking about forms of bias against groups, prejudice, the feelings, discrimination, the behavior, and stereotypes, the cognitions or the ideas. And then lastly, I want to touch on the idea of intersectionality. This is, a super important concept in sociology, and it is the recognition that because societies categorize people in a variety of different ways, the prejudice and privilege that an individual member of that society has is not always based just on one of those categorizations, right? So in the United States, there are many ways we divide ourselves. There are many ways we categorize people. The list could be endless, but there are some very dominant ones, right? So class, race, gender, but also maybe nationality or ableism or religion or primary language spoken. So there's many different ways in which we might categorize people. Maybe we could come up with additional ones, your zip code or your sports team or what have you. But those kinds of categorizations may not be as salient to somebody experiencing prejudice or privilege. Now, certainly if you go to a sporting event or maybe it's a sports bar, and that sports bar supports a team and you go there rooting for the other team, you might experience some prejudice, right? But when we talk about intersectionality, mainly we're talking about the most salient identities that a given culture treats as important for determining whether it confers privilege or prejudice on individual members in that society. And certainly that list, that hierarchy, that ranked priority order of which categorizations matter will vary society to society. You could imagine a society where what religion you are is the number one thing, and another society where what race you are is the number one thing, and another society where what class you are is the number one thing. Or a society that has, similar top 3 or 5, but in different order, or maybe totally different items. But intersectionality tells us that whatever society you're in, you don't just get privilege or prejudice because of one categorization. Take the whole list of ways that society categorizes itself, take the most important top few, draw a line somewhere, and then consider, okay, treat each one of those types of categorization as a kind of sliding scale, right? Think of like a soundboard and they have those equalizers and the sliding scales, right? So, okay, in the United States, here's your class position. How high or low are you on that? And then racial kind of hierarchy. How much prejudice or privilege will you experience on that? And then gender, and then, sexuality, religion, ableism, nationality. And a person's almost like score, prejudice and privilege score, not that it's a math equation, but it's a way of, I think, visualizing the concept, is kind of like a multiplication of the benefits and disadvantages they have at different, levels of these channels, if you will, where they are in the different various hierarchies. And so you kind of multiply those together. So, in the United States, racism is alive and well. We all know that. But perhaps, if you're a wealthy person of color, you experience a bunch of privileges for that wealth, right? Versus somebody who might be, we'll say, a white male, but is super poor, right? And so they'll receive privileges on their whiteness and perhaps on their maleness, but disadvantages, prejudices because of their poorness. Maybe education level, the variety of things we can include. But somebody's experience in a society of being privileged or prejudiced, we should be careful not to link to just one categorization or one hierarchy, but recognize that it's more multifaceted, it's more complex than that. Now, there is the debate of where do you cut it off, right? Which categorizations are the most important? How many should we really consider? Versus at which point, okay, how tall are you? Taller people seem to get a little more privilege, or how pretty are you? Or, what have you. Okay. So there is debate about, which categorizations are most salient, but I think there's less debate about the top few. We kind of know what categorizations tend to demand the most privilege or the most prejudice. And then it starts to become a little more of something we can debate as we get past that first list. And of course, like I said, that priority list will shift society to society. And even in the same society, it may shift over time. Right? If we work towards a future with less racism, maybe racism won't be as big of it'll slide down the priority list, and then there will be something else that is the main way that we categorize people and then confer privilege or prejudice. It is probably unlikely that you'll find a society that does not categorize its individuals in any way and confers no status hierarchy, no prejudice or privilege whatsoever. So there will probably always be categorizations and hierarchies, but they don't always have to be the same as they were, and they don't have to be as extreme as they've been experienced in the past. They can lessen. And we've seen that even with, for example, racism here in the United States or sexism, right? There's been forward progress, not enough, but certainly things have gotten better.